that so much, and I enjoyed being here at Boston College last year. And when Lizzie said I returned by popular demand, it may have been my demand that I returned, but I am thrilled to be here. And so I want to thank you for your attention and watching this film. And the first thing I'd like to do is, if folks have questions, anything you'd like to know, or something in the film that touched you that you want to comment on, please throw them at.
Hi, so my name is Julian. First, I'd like to thank you for showing your documentary here. It was incredibly impactful, I think most likely to everyone in this room, and spoke volumes to the current state of our country. And my question relates to actually one of the first moments of the film. I think his name was Braxton, where you went up to him in South Carolina and had a conversation with him. And you said that people who do not believe in truth and fact cannot be changed, but someone has to try. So how do you reconcile the feeling of not wanting to engage with people who are in some ways so ideologically lost, but feel that need to inform them and educate them in order to create a country based in equity and based in respect for everyone else?
I think that, let me say a couple things about that. I said in the film that I wasn't feeling well. I felt kind of sick in the heat. It was about 98 degrees in Charleston that day. And we landed in Charleston on Thursday afternoon. On Thursday evening, I gave really what was kind of the stage presentation that was part of this film. And the stage presentation is about 3 hours and 20 minutes long. So I gave that at the first integrated high school in Charleston on Thursday night. On Friday, we went to a plantation. We then went to Mother Emanuel Church, where Dylan Ruth slaughtered a bunch of people. We then went to another plantation. We then went to the slave mart. And so when I woke up Sunday morning, I was sick. I thought I had the flu. And interesting thing, I got on a plane to go back to New York that night. And by the time I landed in New York, I was fine. So I was sick, but I don't think the sickness was from the flu or anything. I think it was everything that I had been looking at. And so I spoke to Mr. Spivey. I was in my hotel room, because I was going to stay there until the plane left in the evening. And the two directors, Sarah and Emily Kunstler, two of the most brilliant filmmakers that you will ever meet, and the daughters of William Kunstler. And if the law students in this room don't know that name, you should Google it, because William Kunstler was one of the most dynamic civil rights lawyers in American history. And so anyway, I'm in my room, and Sarah and Emily call me on the phone, and they say, you got to come down here, because we talked to this guy and he signed a release and he'll talk to us. So you've got to come down. So I actually was feeling sick. And I think that, my ability to continue to talk with him was impacted by that. And so I did need to walk away, because I was literally like just not feeling well. I'll talk to Braxton Spivey and anybody else in the country about these topics. I think what I'm trying to say is I do not have the illusion that anyone I talk to will simply change their mind. But you never know who is going to change their mind. And so there's an organization called the National Criminal Defense College, and they put on a 2-week training seminar teaching criminal defense lawyers how to try cases. And I previewed this film there about a year ago, and one of the participants came up to me, a JAG officer from the Marines. He's got tats all over his arms and very short hair. And I'm looking at him, not really thinking or knowing what he's going to say to me. And he said, I really want to thank you for this film, and I want to thank you for the way you spoke to Mr. Spivey, because you didn't yell at him or call him names or say he was stupid. And he said, Mr. Spivey is every man in my family. And when I asked them to watch this film over the holidays, they're not going to be able to dismiss it as a black guy and a white guy yelling at each other over race, because everybody's heard that and you just tune it out. So that was encouraging to me that, you know, and I will say that when I was speaking to Mr. Spivey, I was keenly aware that there were about 50 to 70 people standing around looking at us. They don't show up on the film, but they were standing there and I knew they were standing there. So I was speaking to him, but I was speaking to them as well. So I have no idea. I can tell you for sure, Mr. Spivey has not changed. He still spews incredibly evil stuff over the internet. But Mr. Spivey contacted us after Sony Pictures Classics released this film. And he was very upset because he told us, I think it makes me look like a racist. And I'm not a racist. If I saw the KKK with the Confederate flag, I would be incensed. So what I will say is, Braxton Spivey had a make it lunch moment. Braxton Spivey had a moment where he had to look at himself and the stuff that he spews out, and he knew it didn't make any sense, and he knew it didn't look good. And that moment may not have lasted for him, but I don't know what impact it had to those 70 people standing around. I don't know what impact it had on this Marine and his family when he showed them the film, but I know if it's not there, there'll be no impact. So I guess I would end that with maybe my thought, and it's really a thought about why I did all of this in the first place. There's a person I had in law school, and just a brilliant professor, and he wrote a book with a guy named Cornel West, who many people in this room may have heard of. And one of the things that they wrote is that hope is not a strategy, and that action brings about hope, not the other way around. Hope doesn't cause action. Action is what causes hope. If you had hope after George Floyd was killed, it was because you saw all of these Americans taking action and demonstrating together at the same time. That's what caused people to have hope. And that's a message I really want to send to the law students in this room. Y'all have no choice. You are in it. And your generation of lawyers is going to be one of the most responsible generations in the history of this country in deciding which way we roll at the fourth and I think last tipping point on racial justice in American history. Because I'm telling you right now, if we roll back this time, if we roll back from 50 years after the Kerner report, where we still hear that there is a socioeconomic gap between white America and Black America at every measure you can think of. If we roll back from this, what is it that we're rolling back to? And how long do you think it will take us to dig out just to get back to where we are now? I'm not talking about like revolution or anything like that, but I am saying this. We got 2 million people in prison today, and almost half of them are from my community. You think you don't like America now? I guarantee you won't like America with 5 million people in prison. It will not be the same place. And we are rapidly coming to a point where we are going to have to decide whether we believe in the promise of our country or not. So I'm terrified. And I don't know if y'all are. I'm scared, but there's another part of me that's really happy because we're going to find out just what America is. We are going to find out without any question just how great of a country we are. And while I am scared, I still believe, I actually do, in the greatness of this country. And I believe we can do great things going forward. It's just that we're not going to be able to pretend anymore. So make up your minds about what it is that you're going to do with your legal career. It doesn't matter if you go into corporate law or criminal law or civil law or plaintiff's personal injury or defense. None of that is relevant. You can do important work in any area of the law you're going to go into, but you will have a major impact. Don't make any mistake. Why do you think there's such a controversy over what can be taught in schools? And it hadn't reached law school yet, but you think it won't? I guarantee you it will. And the reason there is a controversy over what's being taught, once again, it's amazing how history can solve so many answers. Because the stuff that we're seeing right now with the anti-CRT legislation, with the state of Florida telling us that slavery gave Black people skills that they could use later, with states saying that the Civil War wasn't caused by slavery. Why are they doing that? Because for centuries, politicians have understood that the minds of the rising generation are where countries either change or stay the same. In 1837, John C. Calhoun, who was twice Vice President of the United States, a senator from South Carolina, and one of the most virulent racists in American history. 1837, 25 years before the Civil War, he wrote an article saying, we have got to get abolition and the teaching of abolition out of the pulpit, the schools, and the newspapers, because that's what impacts the minds of the rising generation. And if the young generation understands abolition, slavery is done for. And we will be in a war that will drench this country in blood. He predicted it 25 years in advance. And if you go to the end of the last administration, the Trump administration, 2 days before they left office, they published a thing called the 1776 report, which talks about taking education back to a patriotic level. And that's what we see with these laws around the country. Every state that has an anti-CRT law, they don't even have a person in the state that can define what critical race theory is, because they don't care what it is. What they're talking about is something on a much more cultural level. They just want, we had a nice little history where, there was some bad things with the slavery, but then there was the Civil War and the Civil Rights Movement, and everything's fine. Everything's been even since then. We don't have to worry about it anymore. And that narrative is not going to hold anymore. So I think we are at one of the most critical times in American history. We are at the fourth tipping point. And this time, the folks who decide which way it's going to roll, it's going to be y'all. It ain't going to be me. And people in my generation, I'm 67 years old. And I will be out there fighting until I can't do it anymore. But one of the things that I recognize, and one of the things that's been very liberating for me, is that this fight will be continuing when I am dead and rotting in the ground. Now, what that means on one hand is I don't have the responsibility to fix it before I die. And that's an incredibly relieving thing for me, because sometimes I feel like me and other people carry that weight on our shoulders. We got to get this thing fixed, but it's not going to be fixed. Not before I die. This is the long struggle and the long haul. The people who put the Supreme Court into place, the Supreme Court that we have right now, they have been working on that for the last 50 years. So we are talking about not little short-term victories, but we're talking about the long haul. And as I've said, I just think that we are in a place now where there is so much information that's going around the country that we're going to find out in this next election, and then the one that comes after that, we're going to find out exactly who we are as a country. And while that scares me a little bit, I still think that there are more of us than there are of them. And the last thing I'll say on this, I'm sorry to take so long on this one question. Please remember that in a democracy, and we're not completely a democracy, but at least we're leaning that way. You know, will I get Braxton Spivey? I don't think I ever will. But I don't need to. You don't need everyone to change the history of a country. In the United States, in an election, 55 to 45 is considered a landslide. The politician who wins with those numbers will say, I have a mandate from the electorate to do what I said I was going to do. So what I'm looking for is about 54% of the people who will make a difference, meaning people who will act. That's all we've got to get. And that's a number that I feel like we can get, especially when there are so many people in this country who are ignorant about the truth about our past. And when they find out the truth, not everybody, but a large number of people will say something like, that really sucks. And it's not fair. And I think we have to do something about it. And that's the beginning of radical change. So it was a very long answer to your question. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Lizzie. I'm 1L. Thank you so much for coming and showing the review. It was great. It was extremely impactful. My question is a little bit complicated, but I guess I was wondering, since you're clearly optimistic about the fact that we have an opportunity to roll forward with momentum again. So what do you think would be something that would prevent us from rolling back again? Or that could be the one and final change for rolling the momentum forward again?
You know, thank you for that question. And it's a question that I think others get asked a lot. And I will tell you what I think about it. I don't claim to have all the answers, so I'm just telling you what I think. My response is that there is no one thing, or two things, or three things. There is no formula of, if we do this, it will go well. And I think part of that is because of our culture. And, you know, this kind of thing of American exceptionalism. So many people are like, okay, there's a problem. How do we solve it? What are the 3 steps to solve it? And there are no 3 steps to solve this problem. And in fact, the problem has grown to the extent that it has grown, because for at least the last 75 years, every time we have tried to do something to make it better, we basically failed. And we have failed because we haven't dealt with the truth about what the problem is. If your history is erased, and the Tulsa Massacre is the prime example. If you went to the Greenwood neighborhood of Tulsa today, you would see a depressed Black neighborhood. It's coming back, but you would see a depressed neighborhood. And if you knew nothing about the Tulsa Massacre, if you had no idea that $10 million in 1921 money in insurance claims were not paid because the insurance company said, well, it was a riot, so you don't have coverage for a riot. If you knew that interstate highways had been built through that neighborhood, destroying that neighborhood even more, and built literally on the ground where people were rolled off rail cars. If you knew that, and now we're trying to come up with solutions to what's happening in Greenwood. If we know the history, we can come up with solutions that are based on what actually happened. But if we don't know the history, we're going to come up with solutions that are by definition going to fail because they don't take into account the true history. So one thing for me, you know, I had a pretty good job at the ACLU. I was a deputy legal director and had a lot of authority. But I just feel like there's so many different ways where this problem has to get attacked. And one thing that it is critical to do is critical to have people understand the truth about why America looks the way it does today. So that's the one thing I'm doing. I'm trying to work in this very narrow lane of education, but I'm going to take up as much room in that narrow lane as I can, because how old are you, would you tell me?
22.
Okay, for people your age and younger, who haven't necessarily, I mean, you've been exposed to a whole lot of stuff and a whole lot of information, but people your age and younger are, I think, gonna be more willing to accept the fact of there's some dark shit, pardon my phrase, in our history that's impacting us today. There are a lot of people who are older who are like, I don't want to deal with it. Because if I deal with that at 67, part of what I have to say to myself is, I guess I've made some mistakes before. And it's very hard for people to question themselves. And you know what, you're saying I'm a racist, you're saying I didn't try and do something nice, or you know, whatever the case may be. So I think that as opposed to thinking about what are like the critical things, obviously voting is a critical thing. But getting involved in your law school, in your community, in your workplace, with your family, to have people understand the truth about our history is an incredibly radical act. And there are a whole lot more things that have to follow after that. But if we don't understand the truth, we're going to be spinning our wheels. And I don't think the Black community in America has another 50 years to spin the wheels. Because if we don't do something, if you think it's ugly now, just wait. Yes. Thank you for that question.
Thank you again for being here. Really enjoyed the presentation. We end this Q&A now. Before I came to law school, my name is Michael, by the way, first year from Wyoming. Before I came to law school, I taught high school history for 2 years, 2019 to 2021. In Texas, one of those years.
Wow.
Yeah. And I look at people like Mr. Spivey, and I wonder in your mind, like, who's responsible for, I guess this is a more philosophical question, but like, who's responsible for what people understand truth to be and the sources that they consult to constitute truth in their mind? Because, you know, if I were in my role previously and a student came in and, like, you know, had those sorts of views, and I could also explain that, like, when I was teaching, I didn't want my students to have any idea, not only how old I was as a joke or so, but also like how I voted, because I felt like that would really prejudice their ability to learn. So like if the student were to come in with a viewpoint like that, I would say, well, you know, he or she learns it at home, and that's sort of where the responsibility lies. But I guess as one goes through the world in your mind, like,
Right.
At what point do you sort of lose the ability to point fingers as an observer and as an individual who holds those ideas and say, oh, actually, this is the reason why we can't even agree on.
Well, you're right. And so, you know, I guess at one level, your question is about personal responsibility and the ability to delude oneself with myth as opposed to fact. And one talent that human beings have demonstrated since before there was written language is the ability to delude ourselves and to fool ourselves and to pretend that things aren't what they are. So, you know, I think, where does the responsibility lie? Ultimately, it lies with all of us. And so even as a 14-year-old kid, there are a lot of things my parents told me at 14 that I didn't just swallow. And so, you know, as a 12, 13, 14-year-old kid, if you can say to them as a history teacher, for example, so let's look at the first 5 articles of the Constitution. and just see what they say. And then it says what it says. And like, oh, you don't believe it? Well, you could go to the National Archives in Washington, D.C. and see the original Constitution. And what if we get on the internet and go to that place? Would that be okay? And so, there are so many, that's the amazing thing about the time that we live in right now. This information is accessible. And one of the things that gives me hope is that the states and the people who are passing these laws restricting what kids can be taught in school. My nephew / son, who was 13 and is now 26, says to me, don't they realize there's a thing called the internet? And do you really think that the history book in a classroom is the only place that students are going to be able to find that information about history? And so I think, what I would encourage, especially young people to do is, if you want to know, like, some stuff about what happened in the past, do a little research, and I can help you with how to do that and the places to look. So if you want to know why the Civil War started, Texas wrote a 37-paragraph explanation of why they were leaving the Union. And the word slavery is mentioned in every paragraph. So I don't know if it was important or not, but we can look at what they wrote and let's talk about what they wrote. So what I want to do with people is to take them to original source documentation. What people said and what they did, and what they said about what they did is not critical race theory. I think it's called history. And if you show people history that conflicts with their assumptions, there are some people who will tune it out. Human beings have an incredible ability to do that. But there are some people who will be changed. My view of the world and racism has gotten much more sophisticated. I can't say it like changed from black to white or, changed 180 degrees. But I have learned a lot and it changed me. I was the deputy legal director of the National ACLU. And they basically said, whatever you want to do on criminal justice and racial justice, do it. You can lead that. And I left that job for two reasons. One, there were brilliant people in their 40s who were under me. And if I didn't leave, they were never going to get the chance to exercise their brilliance. And so sometimes it is time for, some of the older workers to make sure that who's coming up behind them is supported and ready to take on that position. And there were 2 or 3 people that I knew were ready. And the person that has my job now, if you liked me, this woman's name is Jasmine Cater. Just wait. What she is doing is unbelievable. But the other part of my reason was, I feel like, and it goes back to your question, there's like, what can all of us do? We can find 1 or 2 things. And for me, as long as I am able, I'm going to be talking to people in the best way I can about the truth about our history. And so I don't know how many of you tonight heard things that you've never heard before, but if any of you did, that will change your discussions with other people. And after I had taught the class last year, one of the things I said in the last class was, I hope that this has a significant impact on the rest of your law school career. Because anything that you read now, any case that you read, you're going to read with a critical eye. In the voting rights case that the Supreme Court decided, was it last year? Where they said Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is unconstitutional. They said the problem was fixed because of the number of Black people that voted and the number of Black people that registered to vote. The record in that case is replete with people saying that's not the measure anymore. Because that's not the way people are attacking the Black vote. They're doing it in these 7 other ways. The majority ignored that. Go back and look at that case. they don't mention one factor other than the number of Black people voting and the number of Black people registered to vote. It's like the other stuff didn't exist, but this is what dissenting opinions are for. Because if you read the dissent, all of that history is there in the dissent. And today's dissent can become tomorrow's majority opinion. So there are 6 justices on the Supreme Court that agreed in that voting rights case, and they also agreed in the affirmative action case. It doesn't mean the Supreme Court did that. It means there's 6 justices that did that. And you know what? Justices change. So knowing history and how it can impact both the way people see the world and the law is something that I think is just critically important, and a way that we're gonna be able to move forward.
Hi, thank you so much.
Yes.
For being here, and in particular, I want to thank you for your very intentional use of the word enslaved.
I slipped a couple of times, but and this was, the theater thing. I hope folks read or saw that. That was recorded Juneteenth, 2018. So I literally, in the weeks before I was on that stage, was hitting myself in the face every time the word slave would come out of my mouth. And that was, I am much better at it now. It's almost second nature now. But that was a thing that I had to change. And you say, oh, it's a small thing. Actually not. If I say that you're a slave, I'm saying that's what you are. Not that that's what was done to you, but that's what you are. And that term, English matters. So that term was really important to me. And I thank you for noticing it, because I really had to struggle with it, but I worked on it.
Of course, something that stuck out to me that was really profound was sort of the systemic manifestation of American racism, and how pervasive law enforcement or its predecessor, just how pervasive and consistent that was through every sort of era that you brought us through. And I hadn't really noticed just how resilient that system has been until seeing it. And I'm thinking, at one point they said, we're protecting your property interests because we're recapturing enslaved people. Right. At another point, they're saying, well, we are, protecting, I guess, your property interests again when there's white flight to suburbia and you don't want those people moving to your neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. We're protecting you and saving you from people who are addicted to drugs and the super predators and the thugs, right? And so I'm wondering now if you have thoughts on sort of what police cops are quote unquote protecting us from now, and also if you have any thoughts on how that is just something that is so resilient and so oppressive, and how do we deal with that in the law?
Well, I'll say that when I taught my course last year, I had 1 class on policing. This year it's 2 classes, and we did the first one today, and next Tuesday we'll do the second one. So in a class that is an hour and 50 minutes, that's almost 4 hours just on policing. And the reason for that is in part what you just described. I think people can, when you look at a problem and you think it's 20 years old, then your approach to that problem is limited by your knowledge. And if you understand that policing and the issues about policing in the Black community go back to the 1600s, all of a sudden, there's a very different view about how we got here. There's a very different understanding about think about the officer that murdered George Floyd. And think about the fact that for at least 5 to 6 of the 9 minutes that he did it, he was kneeling on Mr. Floyd's neck with his hand in his pocket and a completely calm look on his face. He didn't have his hand next to his gun. ready to fend off people who would try and stop him, he looked completely casual and unconcerned while he was killing this man. Because he knew that nobody was gonna do anything about it. Now, he was wrong, but the history that was behind him told him, don't worry about this. People are like, well, oh my God, look at what happened with Tyree Nichols in Memphis, and it was Black police officers that did it. And I'm like, are you kidding me? You're surprised by that? If you know your history, you will know that people from oppressed groups, some people, some percentage of people from oppressed groups have always associated themselves with the oppressors. After World War II, Israel spent 20 years convicting Jewish people who collaborated with the Nazis. And they finally decided, you know what, these people have moral responsibility, but they were victims too. And it's so complex that we're just not going to prosecute folks anymore. So when people say to me, how could Black cops beat Tyree Nichols to death? My response is, why are you surprised by that? It's the culture of policing and them wanting to belong to that culture. And last thing I'll say on that topic is, the unit that killed Tyree Nichols was literally named the Scorpion Unit. And that it was an acronym for like safety on our streets and people, good community or whatever, but they called it Scorpion. And I think that tells you a lot about what their intent was. So policing, voting, housing, I think all of it goes back to, if you understand where things started, you have a much better understanding of how it could look like it does now. What would you expect policing in America to look like vis-a-vis the Black community? If you understood, then the document that founded our country, our attempts to be free were essentially a crime. The police were told since 1789, watch those Black people and don't let them get free. So if there is an institution that is given that mandate constantly, why are we surprised at what we see today? And so I think that's one of the things that we have to consider. And so what do you do about policing today? It's a long haul because it took 400 years for us to get to this place. But one of the things I'll say is significant is, and every law student in this room can do it, go read the local policing budget in the city where you grew up, whether it's a huge city or a tiny city. And I guarantee you, you will see money in that budget that can be used for other things. Memphis is a prime example. You hear about Memphis, oh, there's crime everywhere in Memphis, and we need the Scorpion units. For the last 7 years, the number of police officers in Memphis has gone down, and crime has gone down as well. If you ask people, is there more violent crime this year than there was last year? Most people will say yes. If you look at the statistics, violent crime has been going down in America for like 7 or 8 years, and even longer than that. So part of it is the narrative, the narrative of our streets are so dangerous, our police officers have to protect us. But breaking through that narrative, one of the ways to break through that narrative is with this history. Yeah, that's what they were saying back in 1900. That's what they were saying even before that. That's what Patrick Henry was talking about. 236,000 of those people. What happens when they decide they don't want to be enslaved anymore? We got to do something. So I feel like if you have this kind of information, it forces you into a place of cognitive dissonance, where it is harder to accept the narrative that we've been given. And that's where I want as many people in America as I can get them, is at a place of cognitive dissonance, because that's where people are willing to do something that they haven't done before.
Jeff, we have one question over there and. you have
Yes.
The last question of the meeting.
Oh, wow.
Thank you again for being here. My name is Francis. I'm also a 1L. The question that I wanted to ask is something that I've noticed about prominent Black scholars and academics that do this kind of work. You usually receive a lot of white backlash and you receive a lot of death threats. I was at a talk earlier this year with Nicole Hannah Jones, and she spoke a lot about this, about all the death threats she received to her family and her. So I guess my question is, how do you grapple with that, and how do you not let that like deter you from continuing to push forward and continue fighting for these issues?
Human beings have an incredible ability to compartmentalize. We do it all the time. We ignore stuff that could do us harm, and we like do it anyway. And sometimes like it's not that healthy. Like alcohol or other kinds of things where we know this can hurt us, but we kind of just ignore it. I just turned 67 at the end of August. I still feel like an incredibly young person, and I got a lot more to do. And so I want to live a long life. There's no question about that. But I'm not willing to live a long life at the cost of sitting in a chair and being silent when I look at what's going on around me. And there are many, this is like, I don't mean to get too deep or philosophical, but a lot of people say, if you don't have something you die for, then you really aren't living for anything. I have no desire to be a martyr. I don't want to get hurt. I don't want to get shot. I will tell you this, when I went to Charleston, South Carolina, the last thing we did was talk to Mr. Spivey. And we were leaving Charleston and happened to say, we didn't get to stop in and see the chief of police. And so we did, because we wanted to talk to him. And we told him about the meeting with Mr. Spivey, and he listened. And he stood up and took off his uniform shirt, took off his bulletproof vest, and put it in a box. And he said, I just got a new vest and I was going to recycle this one, but I'd like you to have it. And I'm looking at him and he says, look, I'm not saying anything's going to happen to you or anybody's going to do anything, but you're down here in Charleston, you're going to other places in the Deep South. And if you feel like you're in a place where you're in trouble or you're in danger, you might want to put this on. So that vest is in my closet in Seattle, Washington. I didn't bring it out here with me, and I have not worn it since he gave it to me. But that was a moment where I had to stop and consider. And I said to myself, I'm small fry. Nobody's going to be looking to kill me or to hurt me. There are many other people that have a much bigger profile, so I don't have to worry about that. But I will say this. I looked at every single person that came in this room tonight. And, I was just wanting to look and see if there's anybody that I got any kind of a vibe from. When I make personal appearances, I am very aware of the people who are right around me. And so, I have given it that much attention, but I guess the last thing I'll say about this is this is like the statement from the least courageous person that you will ever meet, because I have no desire to get hurt. And if somebody told me, if you go to this place, there's a threat on your life, I likely wouldn't go, at least not immediately. But I also think you kind of you got to live your life. And you've got to say what you think. And the pain and the injury that comes from keeping all of this stuff inside me and not speaking about it, man, that would kill me a lot quicker than a bullet or anything else. So at some point, and I'll say this, last thing I'll say. Tell me how old you are.
26.
Okay, here's the difference in perspective. You're 26 and I'm 67. And at 26, I think I might have been a lot more concerned because I had so much of my life in front of me. At 67, I still got a lot of my life in front of me, but you know, I've had 67 good years. If something happens to me, that's really horrible, but I'm not gonna change who I am or what I'm gonna say because some person may do something stupid and hurt me. And what I would say is, maybe Nicole Hannah-Jones has a different explanation, but I don't see her backing down from a damn thing. I don't see Ibram Kendi backing down from a damn thing. And that's one of the things I said in the film that is so important about now. It is the difference between people who are trying to exercise some leadership in this area. And when I was a kid, and it was Martin Luther King. You can't kill one person and stop this. Just can't do it. And with King, it felt like you could, but we're not there anymore. So I feel like I have protection among the Ibram Kendis and Nicole Hannah-Joneses, and if they will include me in their circle, then I'll be completely honored. But I'm careful and I am observant, but I'm just gonna live with it.
So I want to end this really memorable evening by disagreeing with Jeff on something. You are courageous because anybody who has embarked on the journey you've embarked on, left your job at the ACLU after having, I might add, practiced law on behalf of criminal defendants and arguing against systemic racism, changing a significant rule in the state of Washington to preclude peremptory challenges from being used in jury selection because of racism. That is courage. And then you founded the Who We Are Project. And I think you have shown all of us who you are, Jeff Robinson. So
Thank you so much.
on behalf of all of us.
And thank y'all for being with us. Class is Tuesday, 1:30 to 3:20. And can I say that? If you're
Yes.
free, like stop by sometime and just, that's part of it.
And we also have office hours, which are
Office hours are
Tuesday.
today from 3:30 to 5. And tomorrow from 10:15 to noon.
and those are open to everybody in the community. So thank you all for
Thank y'all.
being here.